slightly late start, but I trust Katie when she says that she can make it as long or short as we like. So she's going to try and leave 5 minutes at the end. Here are my opening remarks. We actually know Katie from before, several years ago. And what struck me at that time was how intrepid she was. She was very interested in the outpatient setting as a locus for medical errors and patients finding out which one that's how we got to know each other. And then we stayed in contact, and she just continues to be this intrepid explorer, moving into quality improvement science, testing out end user designs, and so many new interests like machine learning and how do you bring new tools to bear. So I'll do some of the regular background on her. So she was actually born in Gloucester, so she's a total native. Went to Cornell as an undergrad, Georgetown for MD, Brown for residency, and then the BU as a fellow, and then got a master's there. And then went on faculty at UMass, and then so my pleasure to introduce Katie Walsh.
Hi everyone, thank you. So I can there's two ways I can make this fit in the time. Did anyone do high school debate? This is literally in my life the first time I publicly said I did high school debate. So I think we're all close now. Did anybody do that? There's this weird thing where if you talk as fast as possible, you win more arguments. And so, at an early age, I learned how to speak unusually quickly, but it's not a very effective speaking strategy, so I'll communicate clearly. So today I want to just give you some background talk about medication safety in the outpatient setting, including the home. Talk about measuring safety and quality, which I know a lot of people here have a lot of expertise on, and then talk a bit about dissemination and implementation and some next steps. I always like to start with a case. A child with seizure disorders is having seizures with increasing frequency, so the child's neurologist increases the dose of one of the anti-epileptic medications. The mother who attended the clinic appointment and then she went away actually, in truth, it was like a girls' weekend, and we happened to be at the home visit when she got back. And she never told Dad to change the dose of the seizure medication, so the child continued to have lots of seizures over the weekend, unfortunately. And that was discovered when in the presence of our researchers when she got back. So really what I want to talk to you about today is how often these kinds of mistakes happen at home, and how often are children injured by them, and how can we help families at home with the burden of taking care of really medically complicated children. So I thought it was important to start at the beginning. So there are two reports that really shaped the way we think about healthcare today. The first in 1999 was produced by the IOM, which states that 44,000 to 98,000 patients die a year from medical errors. These numbers are controversial, but I think we can all agree that any of these deaths is too many. This was followed in 2001 by Crossing the Quality Chasm, which talked about a new 21st century healthcare system rebuilt with safety, effectiveness, patient-centeredness, timeliness, efficiency, and equity as the primary tenets of the system. Since these reports were released, ARC has spent $532 million on patient safety research. NISQIP was developed. We widely implemented electronic health records. And so where have we gotten since this time? Well, Chris did a study, which was published in 2010 and took place 2002 to 2007. And this was a chart review study of 10 North Carolina hospitals. North Carolina was selected because it was supposed to be in a forerunner in patient safety. They looked at 100 charts per quarter and used the IHI Global Trigger tool. And this chart shows across the bottom is the years, and across the side is harm per, I think it's 1,000 patient days. And then there's varying types of harm as you go down, increasing in severity. And then there's a comparison of reviewers that worked at that hospital and reviewers that were flown in. the bottom line is that there was no change over time. There had been no improvement during that time period. However, another study published in 2014, which used a really different database that I'm not familiar with. I'm not sure if anyone has used this database. It's the Medicare Patient Safety Monitoring System. We're at a children's hospital, so it's not something that a lot of people here would need to use. This is a system that abstracts data from medical records on 21 adverse events, which are typical adverse events like pressure ulcers, infections, surgical site infections, wrong site surgery, things like that. And this study looked from 2005 to 2011 at this database through the entire US. And so it compared the adjusted annual change in rates of harm. And so a 1 is no change in rates of harm. And so they looked at 4 specific conditions: acute myocardial infarction, congestive heart failure, pneumonia, and conditions requiring surgery. And so what you can see is that for pneumonia and conditions requiring surgery, there was no change, but that for acute myocardial infarction and congestive heart failure, there was a decrease in adverse events over time. So what does this mean? I think broadly it means, and this is aligned with other research, that we're starting to see some improvements in inpatient safety. I think it's not earth-shattering changes, but there's some starting improvements. So then I'm going to show you some outpatient research. We're just way behind the progress that we've made in the inpatient setting when you look into outpatient setting, and very few people are considering the home setting. Nationally, there's one phone call every 8 minutes made to poison control about an accidental pediatric overdose outside the hospital. These are most commonly duplicate doses administered by 2 different parents at home, not knowing the other one already did the dose. Tejal Gandhi did a study here in Boston among 661 outpatient adults. She looked at chart review and patient survey and found that 25% of adults have an adverse drug event, of which 11% are preventable. And then Renu Kaushal repeated the study among 1,788 outpatient children using the same methods and found that 57 have preventable adverse drug events, which is 3% of children. So if you think even beyond the clinic and into the home, I think that's the direction that a lot of patients, that's where patients think about their healthcare. And that's really highlighted by Justin Masterson, who's a parent co-investigator on one of our current studies. His daughter has type 1 diabetes. He says the 8 hours a year that a parent and their patient, the child with type 1 diabetes spends interacting with their diabetes clinic represents less than 1/10 of 1% of the time that they spend taking care of their child's diabetes. What would we change if we embrace the reality that diabetes clinics do not care for patients, they support and empower those who do? This kind of research is what I want to talk to you about today. But before I do, in this field, you always have to clarify definitions. So a medication error is any preventable event that may cause or lead to inappropriate medication use or patient harm while the medication is in the control of the healthcare professional, patient, or consumer. An adverse drug event is an injury resulting from medication use. And in the outpatient setting, you also have to think about adherence, which is the extent to which a person's behavior in taking medications coincides with medical or health advice. So when you think about these terms, there's a bit of overlap. In the left is medication errors in yellow, in the right is adverse drug events in blue, and the middle where they overlap is green. So in the case we talked about the child at home, they forgot to increase the doses, there was a miscommunication, that's a medication error. Because the child continued to have a high rate of seizures, it could be considered an adverse drug event. And then, you have to think about non-adherence. This would also be considered non-adherence. They were underdosing the medication at home. Sometimes non-adherence is caused by error, and sometimes it's intentional. And we've been counting non-adherence caused by error as medication error. So let's talk about how we think about these kinds of problems in the home. So this study is really what got me interested in medication use at home and how to prevent errors in the home. The This was a chart review study that was set in 4 outpatient clinics, 3 adult and 1 child clinic. And we reviewed 1,379 clinic visits with 11,908 medications ordered. Here you can see that adults had 7 errors per 100 visits, and the children, and these are cancer patients, had 18.8 errors per 100 visits in the chart. And this was consistent if you looked at errors with injury. There were more errors with injury in the children as well. So being a pediatrician, I was interested in understanding why this was happening. So we use this chart to try to understand it. And you can see that the medications were either given in clinic, a lot of meds are given right in an infusion clinic, and or given at home. And yellow is adults, blue is children, and on the y-axis is the rate of errors per 100 visits. So you can see that in clinic, actually, the adults had more errors than the kids. I don't know if it was significantly different. But at home, the kids had way more errors than adults. It's certainly possible that pediatricians are better at reporting in the medical record when they see mistakes made at home, and that's probably part of this, but we thought that part of it might also be actual mistakes parents were making. And at this time, you know, my husband and I were like literally making mistakes giving our children azithromycin at home. If you can't get an easier med than that, but we still screwed it up. And these kids take 10 meds at home every day, so this is obviously a problem. So the first issue with trying to study medication errors at home is that there was not a method to do that. So I literally drove to Boston and met with Chris, and he helped me by telling me how they did direct observation in the hospital. And we developed analogous methods to use direct observation in the home to understand caregiver medication errors. So the way this works is you get the med list from whatever the gold standard is. And then you go in the home, you do direct observation in the home, you review all of the medications in the home. We have an environmental scan that looks at human factors related to error and parent interview. And then all of the possible errors are reviewed by physician reviewers, which is the method used in any kind of medical errors research. The inter-observer reliability for 2 nurses in the home independently observing medication administration is good, it's 0.7. And the inter-rater reliability for physician reviewers is really consistent with the literature. It's 0.9 for whether the error occurred and 0.7 for severity. So let me show you the next few slides how we use this method. So every time we go in the home, we take a photo of the bottle label. We have over 3,000 of these that I don't know what to do with. So every time I give a talk, I say, does anyone want to do research with bottle labels? With lots of if anybody wants to reach out. So this is the first study we did. It's a single site study. We went to the homes of children with sickle cell anemia and seizures. And what we found was that there were a lot of errors. We found 0.3 errors per patient in children with sickle cell anemia and 0.04 errors per patient in children with seizures. In those 2 populations, there were some differences in the types of errors that we found. Children with sickle cell anemia had trouble filling prescriptions, and they had difficulty taking Exjade, which is an oral chelator that you put in like 8 ounces of water. It was a huge improvement on the injection chelation they used to use, but I don't know if you guys have Miralax that you've used with kids. It's hard to get kids to drink a whole pile of water, so they would often use to drink it, like whatever they could do to avoid having to drink their Exjade. And then in seizures, it was this problem with increasing and decreasing doses, which is the same thing we see in kids with cancer. So let me show you a multi-site study with the kids with cancer in this slide. This was a 3-site study done here at Dana-Farber with Kathy Bolan, so fun to work with. We also worked with Amy Billett and Barbara Degar, and then with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and AP Mass. We found a pretty widely variable rate of errors. You can see here, and so we had to account for clustering by site. Overall, when we accounted for clustering by site, we found 3.6 errors per 100 patients, which is the same rate of errors that you see in publications in hospitalized children. So these kids at home are having pretty high rates, and this is errors with injury. So when I got to when I got to Cincinnati, I had an opportunity to collaborate with a pretty big adherence group. And so we reanalyzed the data to try to understand the relationship between adherence, where there's a really very long history line of research, and errors, which uses a different philosophy really, but is a new form of research. So for these 92 kids, we had asked them the Mariski scale, which is a commonly used non-adherence scale, and we did find that 17% of these parents of children with cancer strongly agreed that they sometimes forgot their medications. And then when we re-reviewed the events, all of the errors, we found that about 30% of them, 29%, were also non-adherence. So an example of that would be a family's supposed to take CSMP on Monday to Friday, 1 tab, and then Saturday, Sunday, 1.5 tabs. And instead they just took a tab every day. So that was non-adherence, as well as an error. It was an accident. And then some errors that weren't non-adherence would be, sometimes we actually saw bottle labels that said the methotrexate should be taken daily rather than taken daily on Wednesdays, which is a little bit of a scary error. And fortunately, that family was taking the methotrexate correctly, but Saul Weingart, who was at the time the CMO at Dana-Farber, had published case studies where families received a bottle label like that and took it up with some serious consequences. So next, and then we have lots of photos. This is a nice bag. This is a very organized family. And you can see the MEMS count. This is our current study. It's the slightly larger bottle compared to the other bottles is the MEMS counts for these. This is our current study. It's literally like I got a text this morning with a bunch of tables from our statistician, so I can't tell you much. We're literally analyzing now. So we wanted to learn enough so that I could stop doing home visits and start doing intervention. And so what did we do? We wanted to categorize rates and types of ambulatory medication errors, including caregiver error and preventable adverse events. And I thought that was important because we only had 4 harms from the prior study, and I wanted to know where to target intervention. So we did complete 3 visits over 6 months to 168 children. We did a total of 380 home visits and reviewed 3,044 medications in the home. In order to identify the contribution of error on adherence, we gave everybody these MEMS caps. Are you guys familiar with these things? The bottom is a regular empty bottle, just a little bigger, and the top is an electronic top. So it records every time you open and close the bottle. And then they have some now where they can, every opening and closing is electronically shared. These ones, you have to get the bottle and scan it. So we use the MEMS devices, and then we use a self-report of adherence. And then finally, to identify individual, family, and healthcare system factors that contribute to or protect against serious errors. For that, we're using a lot of scales. For example, we're looking at caregiver fatigue, anxiety, and depression because you guys have found that for nurses and doctors, that's associated with errors, so we want to know, is it for caregivers? We've looked at health literacy. Oops.
Exit on the up.
Okay. And then we also are looking much more closely at human factors. So our work is grounded in the SEEPS 2.0 model. And so the SEEPS 2.0 model focuses on the interaction between the patient, or the family at home, or the nurse, the person, and technology, as well as processes and the organization to see how those affect outcomes. And then the 2.0 model sort of put the arrows on the bottom that show that you can adapt and change over time in the entire system. So I'm working with Tasha Wetterneck, who's at the University of Wisconsin, and Nancy Durisse is one of our human factors engineers to incorporate this. So because we don't have any results, I thought I'd share a run chart, which is what I learned at Cincinnati Children's. And so here's my run chart. So we unfortunately had a problem, which is a very common problem, which was that we had trouble with retention. We were trying to do 3 home visits over 6 months. As it turns out, 1 in 5 pediatric clinical trials ends early because of inadequate attention. The trial never gives you any results. So we used our QI approach to try to improve retention. So this, unfortunately, when you're recruiting cancer patients, that is a rare event. And so then attrition is also a rare event. So I first tried a more normal line chart without success, and then I landed on this statistical process control G chart. So what you see across the bottom is the date that each patient left our study. And what you see across the y-axis is a desirable event, which for me was having a home visit. So I actually emailed this to, I was taking a class, so I sent it to Lloyd Provost and Peter Marvelous, and he was like, yeah, this is wrong because your patient's leaving your study like every 3 home visits. And I was like, no, actually, that's correct. So we started out with that, and then we started just tweaking. So we tried to improve our recruitment materials because a lot of people were leaving before the first home visit. So we thought, well, they don't know what they signed up for, let's work on that. We then worked on scheduling the first home visit at the time of recruitment. And then I was advised to look at this special cause data point. So I included the formulas because I think people should always share their formulas when they're using these run charts. So the upper confidence limit you can see here is the 3rd upper confidence limit. And we have a point outside of it. And so what they call that is special cause, which means that your system is not working the same way for that one data point than it did for the rest of the time. So we're told to explore that. So what we did was we looked at when these patients were recruited and who recruited them. And when we did that, we found that this one research assistant that ran my study was the one recruiting here. Whereas here and here, we were sharing with other people. And so we found that when the other CRCs recruited, like we did less work, but their patients left the study. And so we ended up switching to just having one primary coordinator, and we saw some improvement. So we think that adding the primary coordinator and removing other coordinators recruiting is what is leading to some improved retention. This run chart was at only one site, and then the second site didn't have problems with recruitment. The third site, or with retention, the third site had the same thing. They had one special cause data point when they lost all their other recruiters, and they saw improvements in retention when they switched to having just one recruiter. So that's that. That's under review at Journal of Oncology Practice. And then one other interim thing we did, we wanted to know really, do we need to do all these home visits? Is there some other way we can identify errors at home? And so this is a study done at 2 of our 3 sites where we compared the different methods to see how we detected errors. There were 24 patients with 72 visits and 647 medications. In blue, you can see that ordering errors, and in orange are administration errors. We didn't, in this smaller sample, identify any other types of errors. Overall, we found 54 errors, 10 with injury and 44 that had potential for injury. We excluded what we call clinically trivial errors from this study because we didn't really care if we found those or not. That was the decision we made. And so you can see that chart review, as with prior studies, is really good at finding ordering errors. And that, unfortunately, to find administration errors, you need to do a lot of different things. We only found 2 errors independently by 2 different methods. So there were 2 times that the chart showed the error, and we also found it in the home. So our conclusion for now is that we still need to do something that simulates our home visits. So next steps for this study, this is my favorite study ever. This is a super fun study. This is a learning lab. It's a particular kind of mechanism from ARC. It's an R18. And our long-term goal is to redesign systems of care and coordination between clinic and home to eliminate harm due to healthcare in these settings. The way we wrote this set of aims is I went to Steve Newthing, my boss, who's the VP for safety, and then we went to the head of ambulatory, and then they sent us to 2 divisions that they said would be most effective at changing outpatient care. And with those divisions, we wrote these aims. So this is literally what they told us they wanted to work on. And we also worked with several parents of children with autism and diabetes. So the aims are, there were a lot of stipulations about how you write this grant. So they look wonky, but they're relatively straightforward. It's to understand the current processes for adjustment of medication dosing based on clinic information gathered by the patient and family to prevent errors. And that's a type 1 diabetes. So that's if I call you from home and I tell you my kid's sugars and there's a problem, then you go through this whole process, you come back and tell me what to do, and I do it correctly. That's aim 1. Aim 2 is to understand the same kind of processes for children with autism. And particularly, we're focusing on adverse drug events because these kids take a lot of medications at home, and some of the medications have a lot of side effects, like antipsychotics. And then aim 3 is to understand the current workflow to plan for, detect, and prompt management of serious illness among children with both of these conditions. So it's essentially improving our telephone triage process to prevent treatment delays, to understand where treatment delays happen and prevent them. We also have kind of a funky team for this. We're working with MadPow, which is a design firm here in Boston, along with human factors folks from UW. And then the T1D clinic, the autism clinic, about half our team is parents and clinicians. And then this method is actually also prescribed by the grant. We're doing right now our problem analysis, which we're calling the mustard section, and 3 years we'll get to the catch-up section. So problem analysis is a lot of the things I've talked to you about, home visits, FMEAs for families, digital diaries, and then we get to an opportunity-based design day with all of the trappings. And then MadPow, we chose them because they'll help us with development. Some of the others would only get us to the design day. And so they'll help us with development, test retest cycles, and also they'll do an environmental scan of like the country to look for existing solutions, for example, existing apps for diabetes care at home, things like that. We have a sort of fun factorial design randomized trial, one for diabetes, one for autism, in the SIM Center, where we're going to put all of the interventions together and make sure they're not going to kill anyone or cause any problems, and that they'll work well together. And so the simulation is also cool because it's going to be in the SIM Center and then phone calls to home. So the home will be part of the simulation. And then regular old implementation. So I have no results for any of this, unfortunately, but I'm sure they'll be interesting when we get them. So questions or comments on, that's the home, and then I'm going to shift gears to stuff related to the home. So I want to talk about measurement of safety and quality, sort of humbly recognizing that, that I'm not the expert on measurement, but that we've done some work in this area. So hospitals and doctors' offices annually spend $15.4 billion reporting quality measures. And these are reporting to the Joint Commission, reporting to insurance companies, et cetera. The vast majority of that time is spent entering data. How well is this data used? Unfortunately, it's not really very useful. So only 30% of practices, you can see from the first set of bars up here, believe that these measures represent quality of care. And similarly, only 30% of practices use the data for quality improvement. So really, although it's frustrating for us, really, the patients are missing out because this is a massive investment in quality reporting, producing improvements in healthcare quality for our patients, at least at the bedside. This editorial from JAMA starts to address this problem. In blue on the left is the current system, and in sort of this ivory color on the right is the potential future system. So you can see that currently measures are administrative, they're narrow, they're superficial, they can be disjointed and rigid, and then when you can't use administrative data, then you're manually extracting charts, which is laborious. In the future, one would hope that they would be clinical, using all the EHR data we have, broad, deep and multifaceted, harmonized, fluid, so you can sort of change them, add them, and then electronic, which is efficient. So how did we start to work on this? So I should recognize John, who essentially helped me write this grant and then helped me get the work done. So this is the objective that we came up with, and it was really grounded in some work that John did on what it is that health systems want from this kind of data. So the objective of this study was to demonstrate the feasibility of assessing quality using data drawn directly from the EHR. The methods were pretty straightforward. We used technical specifications. We focused on existing NQF measures, and so the technical specs were already available. We then did measure development, and we used chart review to compare to the electronic measure. This was funded by PCORNet as one of their health systems demonstrations projects. And it was to demonstrate the value of the PCORNet Common Data Model to health systems. The PCORNet Common Data Model is a system of organizing data into a standard structure. PCORNet, if you look on their website, they write these for families, so they simplify everything, and this is actually relatively complex. So it's essentially, it's a standard system for sharing data. And it's similar or based on the FDA Sentinel Common Data Model. And so it's essentially creating a common data library across all of these different hospitals so that you can use the same data library to pull data. So, and then there's a existing data infrastructure, so you don't have to typically create new DBAs. It's much easier and faster. This study was set in while I go back, I'll tell you about the two networks it was set in. The study was set in One Florida, which is a network that actually includes 40% of the patients in Florida. And then it was set in PedsNet, which is a network of 8 children's hospitals, including Boston Children's and Cincinnati. I just want to briefly show you what we found. We looked at 3 measures, and I just chose this one. This is the percent of children on antipsychotics who received metabolic screening in 2015. Children on antipsychotics require metabolic screening because they have a 4-fold increased risk of diabetes, and they have an increased risk of hyperlipidemia. You can see here the sites are across the x-axis, the percent eligible for metabolic screening, or on the y-axis. I purposely left these in just to tell you, these sites didn't have the data available yet. The Common Data Model was just updating. And they do periodic updates so this happens. So the lab data weren't available from these sites, and they didn't contribute to this number. The overall rate of screening in these patients was only 38.5%. It's pretty low and actually consistent with the literature. What I like about this figure, the dots are the actual rates at each site, and then the bars are the confidence intervals. So you can see some best practices maybe here, some people that can tell us what they're doing well. And then you can see some folks that might learn from that here. And so you can sort of, it naturally shows you where you might go to quality improvement to start to make some changes. So the good news from our chart review was that the Common Data Model worked pretty well. We reviewed 20 charts per site at 9 sites, a little less than that. Some sites it varied a bit. The positive predictive value was excellent. It was 100%. If it said it worked, it worked. Negative predictive value wasn't quite as good. It was 84%. So if the electronic measure said that the tests were not done, it was usually right, but not always right. And then we looked at the different parts of the NQF measure. We found for the antipsychotics that it worked pretty well, but obviously dispensings were better than prescriptions because we know they actually got their meds. Again, if they said you got your labs, you did. For those where they said that you didn't get your labs, you can see that it ranged by site. So what we found is that if some of the Florida hospitals, for example, used outside labs a lot, and then those were scanned in, and the scanned data wasn't accessed by the Common Data Model. So if you were going to, if it was important to have this particular data, then you would cherry pick sites that had 100% predictive validity for that. So we had a really unusual renewal process. What we learned from the first year was that the Common Data Model was both valid and efficient. It was very fast to do, for example, chart reviews, and the DUAs were done, et cetera. And that it was easy and efficient to tweak the measures. You just need to change the programming. So what Corey said is, we'll pay you for another year, but you need to get a cost match from each participating hospital up to $500,000. So working with different CMOs and VPs, we shared data from year 1 and asked them what they wanted for year 2. And what they wanted was data that helps collaborate to learn how to close the gap between current care and perfect care. The aims we came up with based on that was to, and these are the folks who gave us the cost match with the exception of our parent co-investigator. The first aim was to evaluate the validity, efficiency, and satisfaction with the PCORNet Common Data Model compared to current health system methods to measure quality. And we had our nominal group technique focus group with CMOs and VPs. John participated. We did it in an hour with some prep, and the group decided to work on type 1 diabetes. And so right now we're in the middle of almost on the measure development. And then aim 2 is to refine reporting and develop data sharing processes within these different hospitals. So from the data coordinating center back to the hospitals to facilitate their learning for variation to improve outcomes nationally. So this is our year 2. And we actually met the $500,000 cost match. We did very well in that regard. So this is an ongoing study. We're hoping essentially that this kind of common data model can put quality measurement back in the hands of clinicians and health system leaders. And finally, I want to talk briefly about dissemination. So if you're an inpatient hospitalist, we're now in the inpatient setting, so you feel comfortable for this one study. So why is dissemination important? Well, we often think about networks, especially in patient safety. Networks are massively helpful. Networks can drive safety through widespread dissemination of best practices. For example, the Solution for Patient Safety Network has achieved a 60% reduction in surgical site infections across their 135 hospitals. In addition, the U.S. has awarded well over $110 million for learning networks with well over 3,700 hospitals participating. However, we have the sense from the networks that there's failed or partial spread sometimes of safety interventions, and that limits impact, right? Essentially, it means that some people are not benefiting, but some lives you could have saved are not being saved. There's little tidbits of this in the literature if you look for it. For example, the Michigan ICU study reduced CLABSI by 66%. This is this really strong study in 108 ICUs. They never gave you the hospital-to-hospital numbers, but the Overvelt did write a paper saying that they found that there was better performance in smaller hospitals, but they didn't have the data to know why. So we don't know why it happens, but it happens. There was a marquee MedRec intervention which reduced harm in 3 ICUs but failed in 2 ICUs. And we've seen in the SPS data and in Improved Care Now that there's variation site to site on how well things go. And then context and implementation factors impact the spread of interventions. For example, Ashish Jha identified capital investment and maintenance costs as barriers to EHR implementation. That's a very simple example. So we have an opportunity to study this prospectively using Ninja. I don't know, is anyone familiar with Ninja? Yes, okay. So Ninja is an intervention where pharmacists recommend daily serum creatinine measurement, dose adjustment, and less nephrotoxic medications for patients who are on a multiple nephrotoxic medication exposure in the hospital. So, and this, you can see, this is our run chart from Ninja at Cincinnati Children's, where it caused a 58% reduction in medication-associated AKI. So our opportunity was to prospectively evaluate the impact of context and implementation factors on the spread of Ninja to 9 children's hospitals. So, this is based in some frameworks, and we use the world's simplest Paris framework. It's been reiterated like 4 times, but this is the simplest part of it. Essentially, the Paris framework says that for an evidence-based practice to impact health, it results from an interaction of the evidence-based practice with how you facilitate implementation and the context of where you put it. And then in order to better understand the context, we use my colleague Heather Kaplan's MUSE framework, which is the model for understanding success and quality. So she talks about different parts of context, and I'm sorry this model is small, but frankly, if I make it bigger, it doesn't make it less complex. So it's external environment, which is like regulations, Joint Commission, how much money you get for something. The organizational environment, the QI team, the microsystem. All those different factors can impact how you implement. Let me just quickly get to it. I want to tell you we use qualitative comparative analysis, which is super cool. It's a case-oriented set theoretic technique for identifying invariant relationships. It's good because it's based in Boolean math, so it uses three-dimensional arrays. And so the p-value is not sort of part of the math. You can use small n's. And it can show multiple pathways to success. We did reduce AKI by about 22% in these 9 hospitals. On top are the ones that succeeded. There were 5 that succeeded. On the bottom were 4 that did not. We looked at a whole bunch of factors by doing a survey quarterly for the 3 years and also doing qualitative interviews. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to show you the ones that matter. This looks to me like a mutant egg, fried egg, but this is our results. And so here you can see this qualitative comparative analysis has necessary conditions and sufficient conditions. And the best way to think about it is, if you want to reduce AKI, you have to have this necessary condition. It's necessary for NINJA to work that your AKI rate be over 1. If it's under 1, it's not going to make any difference for your hospital. So you can see 3 hospitals, it didn't help them. They tried to implement NINJA, no change, because they were already good. If you have an AKI rate over 1, that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. It doesn't mean you're going to have it work. We found 2 pathways to success, and this is something you can't do with sort of standard stats. One pathway is, for 4 hospitals, you have a pharmacist champion with salary support for NINJA, so somebody you're actually paying, and then you have more than 1 pharmacist working on NINJA. NINJA is pharmacist intense, and so you don't have the pharmacist, you have a problem. Except for 1 hospital, where this poor soul had no pharmacist, no QI support, no data support. She literally just slogged away at this all the time, all by herself. But what she had is no competing interests. So for 3 years, nobody asked her to do anything else. And so she also produced something else. So it's helpful though, right? Because we know people like this that succeed in getting these kinds of things done. And the implications for this is that this is right now being spread to 135 hospitals in SPS. Some of which may have a baseline AKI rate under 1. And so what we found here is you don't need a quality improvement coordinator, you don't need an analyst. So when you're thinking about how to spend your money, this is helpful. This is my last slide. So what about next steps for all these different sort of safety type research studies? Well, the other thing I do is mentoring. This is one of my favorite slides because I cleverly stopped it in 2015. These are the folks I mentor at Cincinnati. Everyone knows your research funding is never a parabola. So I presented to the board in 2015 and then stopped gathering this data, but we're still bringing in some grants, but not that fast. So they grew, right? And they started bringing in their own funding. You can see that here. I think the next steps are pretty clear because some of this is very early. So ambulatory safety, you need more interventions. But also you need some measurement, right? If you're going to test interventions, you're going to have some sort of measurement you can follow over time, and that's pretty hard in ambulatory safety, especially when you're thinking about the home. And then you need a mechanism for spread. SPS, maybe that's a mechanism for spread. Right now it's all at hospitals. Maybe there are other mechanisms for spread, but you need that too. For safety measurement, I think it's clear that there needs to be some refinement in owning. And then improvement science, like this QCA stuff we did is not frequently done. So people often don't think about where will this intervention spread well, where will it not spread well, and how can we facilitate the spread, or when should we not invest in this particular kind of spread? And so I think that's where we need to go there. I always try to remember my husband many errors that I did. And at that time, the Navy was on a 30-year journey. So we were about 30 years behind. So I figured, all of this is part of the 30-year journey. That's it.
Thank you so much. I was really interested, particularly in the first piece when you were speaking about home visits and the impact of picking up medication administration errors. And I was wondering whether you look at the utility of telehealth to kind of be a surrogate for that. I've started doing it in the complex care service where our kids are on 20+ medications, often requiring compounding, and we've been able to just look at the bottles through the screen and actually pick up some of those concerns. So I was wondering if that.
Yeah, I think we will do that in the future. We've used text messaging, so take a picture of your med and then text me and tell me how you're using it. Because when you're changing the dose a lot, that's the kind of problems that people have if they don't understand that. I think otherwise Skype is another way that we could try to go. Those are things we've tested in sort of smaller pilot studies, but not in a larger context. It's really good.
Can you talk a little bit more about sort of at the very end you were talking through beginning to scale some of this work and think about how do you network in the ambulatory setting and begin to both better understand what's happening out there and also spread interventions once you're the you got something to spread.
Yeah. It's a really good question, and I've had conversations with Shauna Yin and Michael Rink, and also I've sort of watched Shauna try to engage SPS as sort of fly on the wall and a participant. We talked about a lot of different things. Obviously there's no low-hanging fruit there. SPS does feel an obligation to ambulatory safety. I think Anne and Trey get asked a while, like, what about this one you're not working on? But they're mostly hospitalists. So as much as they have the C-suite participation, they already have a successful, in my mind, network. I think it works well. So to me, that seems like maybe a place to start. We've talked about working with the AAP because you need to get to the private practices. That's a totally different model, right? So I think those are the obvious networks to start with. I think what I said to Shauna is I think you have to start with QI. So, there's things that we know work that nobody does. And so the way the SPS worked is it was somewhat organic, like all the Ohio hospitals started working together and they used QI. So once you have the research and prove it works, you need that QI infrastructure around the country. Like I'm not sure working with Pro is the right way to go, for example, but leveraging some QI infrastructure would be helpful. So that's about all I have on that subject. I'd love to hear what others think, actually.
Just to switch gears a little bit, and what strikes me about your work is that it starts out with epi, and then it has some quality improvement science, and then you're moving into like core behavior. And I'm wondering for the trainees that you work with, that just sounds like it's such a different thing that you might want out of med school residency training than what we have right now. So could you speak a little bit about how those new disciplines were fed into your mentees training?
Yeah, often, that's a great question. We do a lot of quality improvement training and I write that into my grants now, there's just a huge amount of quality improvement training. Some of these other, obviously things like QCA, you just learn by doing it when you need to do it. And then some of the stuff in between, people are writing into their K awards now. We have that KL, there's awards for learning networking, sort of skill sets, which are paper about skills around learning network research, which is some of this. But I think that there's a paper where I've seen people interpret that as you need to have all these skills. When I read it, I don't have anything like all, you need IT skills, data skills, qualitative methods, blah, blah, blah. So I think what I love and what you have to learn early is teamwork. But it doesn't entirely, right now, we don't have a curriculum that covers all of that. It's little bits. So there's more that could be done.
So you're piecemealing it through collaborators?
For me, or for our mentees.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to think of, essentially, it doesn't sound very good, but, and through like a culture where others are working together. And, do you guys have, just other folks have comments on that?
No, I guess I would just echo that. I think most of the projects that I've gotten involved in over the past 10 years, as they get more complicated, that's what you have to do, right? It's more than one person can know. That's fine. But it's just for exciting. That's really rewarded and do that.
Yeah, what I learned from the Picori study was like they were saying words like lab link, blah, blah, blah. Charlie Bailey was saying all this. I had no idea what he was talking about. And I'd done like similar work in FDA, but it didn't have all this. So I'm like, can you spell that for me? I don't know what that is. And I think a lot of people are not that comfortable looking like an idiot on running a team that way. For me, I loved it. Like that is my favorite. Like on the learning lab, somebody was like, oh, you need a social story so that people who visit at home with autism are comfortable. I'm like, I don't know what a social story is. Apparently, it's something that kids with autism read over and over again so they feel comfortable. And we actually, unfortunately, visited someone without the social story and visited them with it. It made a huge difference. So for me, I think that if you could teach anybody anything, it would be like, if you're working in or leading a transdisciplinary team, you got to be very comfortable saying what you don't know and creating an environment where people can say, well, you didn't do this very important thing. Like, let's talk about these things.
So I think part of this is always generational in science. So that paper that Kate's referring to that laid out kind of what's the curriculum for a learning health system researcher kind of lays it all out. So people who are in Katie and many of us in the room are just winging it because we didn't have that curriculum and we're not gonna go back and get it, but if you were intentional and starting out as a 30-year-old saying this is what I want to do for a living, what would be the curriculum? You would at least have some exposure to those things and you'd still not be an expert in all of them.
So maybe that answers the question better.
Right, so.
Well, it is just really different from basic HSR training, which has a component of like causality and, you know, it's just really focused on other things. So that's what this,
Yeah.
I would say it's the same as HSR training was 25 years ago, where people who could call themselves HSR people had just were winging it, and now we have
HR people
HSR.
who are like, thanks for clarifying which generation I'm in.
It doesn't help me that much. But I think it's a really good point. We should think about this. I feel like it's important to think about.
Yeah, like what do we need to train in the future, for sure. Any other questions?
Can I just applaud you for using the metabolic screening?
Oh, thank you.
The reason is, in fact, as recently as yesterday, the Children's Hospital Association did a value-based webinar, 200 participants on that, and I asked the presenter, who's the Chief Value Officer for Minnesota Children, so what are the quality measures thinking about these children with medical complexity and social deterrent risk factors? She basically said HEDIS. And I did that on purpose because those core sets are filled with HEDIS, and the ability to get the attention of the payers, Medicaid, and sort of the quality community writ large, and QA to get their attention for this kind of work is really, really, really tough. So there are more measures in that core set, for example, about rates of well-child visits and immunization. Not that those aren't important, but this is kind of like a parallel universe. And so that actually is one of my favorite measures. It's a relatively small n, but it begins to call out that notion of reaching across sectors.
Yeah.
So this actually is a proxy measure for children with medical complexity. But there ain't a hell of a lot more in this core set, so there's very little in the pipeline pushing it in that direction. So I thank you for using that as an example.
And that was helpful context. I'll keep using it. I don't know where
This is the room for improvement, right?
Yes.
Low scores.
Yeah, there's lots of room for improvement. It's hard, right? Because, there's a lot for sure. These patients get care in a lot of different places, but it's a very vulnerable population.
I was actually curious how well you think the data set captures potentially psychiatrists outside of the system.
So
That's something we hear a lot about.
yes, I was worried about that also. I think the chart review would have that, and so we actually, it wasn't that bad. What we found was more of these scanned labs, but the patients, there. We found a lot of the scanned labs, but in terms of like patients getting psych care in one place, they had to be prescribed the antipsychotic and in this medical home that we were looking at, and then that's where we looked for the labs. I was worried that, so if they were prescribed outside, then we wouldn't have captured that. But we were using dispensings, so it was better than looking at the actual script itself. I mean, that's the problem with this measure actually, is that it's health system set. And so we did talk about that if a patient, it's not patient-centered, essentially.
Can I ask just one more about this on the qualitative comparative analysis?
Yeah.
How do you know you're not just picking up an idiosyncrasy? I
Yes.
think of that chart. So you get 4 groups, and then you have one group. And how do you know that's just not a complete unicorn? That just one person was
that's a great
successful.
question.
It'll never work again.
Right, that's a great question. So we use the qualitative comparative analysis, which is math. Like in someone, Dan Schroeder, who did the CFIR, has this, she actually shows like a slide of math, of all the kinds of math, and this is statistics to prove that there are other kinds of math that are math too. Because some of it is, I talked to my husband about it, he's like, well, there's no p-value, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, no, it's math too. But it's so some of it is that there were 3-dimensional arrays that were used to look at those comparisons. And then some of it was that we did qualitative interviews and we triangulated on that. And some of it is like I would like to replicate the study. The study has not been replicated, and so I think we have to replicate it to see that, and maybe we can do that in SPS. So you're right.